I've been exploring for a long time, how do we monetize attention in restaurants? And that might be something that people don't like, and I imagine they probably won't. But we need to find new high margin revenue streams in this industry, one way or another. And attention seems to be the dominant currency for higher margin revenue.
All right, so I got to be honest. We were going to talk. We will talk about your restaurants. You're founder of Shy Bird. It's been great to see how you guys have been building this. But I started reading all of your Substacks, I guess we'll call them, right? Your writings.
Yeah.
Man, there's so much we could talk about. There's probably way more topics than we're going to have time for because I have a million questions about all of the really incredible articles that you've been writing. And then you sent me this curveball this morning.
Sorry.
No, it's great. It's awesome. This makes it for a really fun conversation. So anyway, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, we chatted a week or so ago about Reggie, your new building. Why don't we actually start with the thing that you sent me this morning? Because I thought that was super interesting. And it looks like you had prompted some language model, what would it look like to reframe what a restaurant is? Because I think that's going to be an interesting anchor for some of the stuff you've been writing about. So do you want to talk about that? About what you...
Yeah, sure. So this was actually something done in collaboration with Hungry and Matt Newberg, who runs a really cool little community around restaurant tech and sort of the future of food and technology. So I did a breakout session at his conference last year in LA. And, I'm a big believer that I love what I see around restaurant tech, around sort of optimizing restaurants and helping them hopefully run better. At the same time, I think our economic model's a little too broken for that to be the extent of what we do to innovate in restaurants. And I'm just a curious person, and I started learning a lot about design thinking and researching companies like IDEO and came across this concept of reframing. And I really started to think that there was a lot of value in rethinking what a restaurant was in order to unlock some ideas about how it might become more economically sustainable and rewarding. And so what this was working with an LLM to come up with different ways of reframing a restaurant. Although I will say the origins of this are 10 plus years old. I taught at BU and I taught a class on reframing restaurants then too. So.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Wow. So can we get in a little bit of the weeds of the answers that came from it? Because
Sure.
It looks like you got some sort of, some wild ideas and then sort of narrowed it down a bit. It was like a manufacturer. I don't know if you remember any of these. I actually pulled them up too, so I can share them with you. But
yeah, no, I have them all pretty committed to memory.
Just throw it out there, man, because I think there's some interesting ones.
Yeah, most of them actually were ones that I fed the LLM to get it to understand. And sort of part of the inspiration recently for this was I actually looked at the New York Times because I thought it was a really interesting point of reference here. I think we're both kind of 19th century industries that are struggling in the 21st century, media and restaurants. And the New York Times has figured it out. And I think a lot of the reason they figured it out is that they reframed what they are. They're in the news business, which doesn't make any money. And so they realized they were actually in the attention business and started buying companies like Wordle and investing more in cooking. And so they're basically using entertainment and attention to subsidize a no-profit business that is media or news. And not to be Debbie Downer about the restaurant industry, but we're also kind of a low to no profit business that needs other ways of thinking about making money. And so that was sort of where the reframing came in. So some of them are one of them is around that. Restaurants are an increasingly large canvas for attention. You can't open a publication these days without seeing someone talking about restaurants. I did a back of napkin sketch with someone a while ago, and it looked like the average American follows about 12 restaurants on Instagram. When you actually take you scrape the sum of all Instagram followers, for all restaurants and divide it by the denominator of the number of restaurants, we're following about somewhere between 9 and 12 restaurants per person. So we're canvases for attention. I think, one of the ways I talk about restaurants when people will listen is, we are sort of the last bastion of industrial manufacturing. You can think of a restaurant as, you can reframe it as a sales and marketing floor and a manufacturing facility jammed right up against one another. And I think a lot of our problems actually, and challenges and opportunities as an industry, are rooted in that simple sort of first principle.
So, I mean, I think it's obvious, obviously, when you start to dig into it, but can you talk about some of those challenges?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think it's pretty relentless these days. You've got increasing costs of food, you've got increasing cost of labor, rents and occupancy costs are going up. Nationwide, I think we're around 4% average profitability as an industry. I've been doing this long enough to know when that number was double that, triple that, quadruple that. Granted, at times that was rooted in exploitation, and I'm glad that we're not doing that anymore. But we also employ 1 in 10 people, and 4 cents on the dollar doesn't bode well for all the people who rely on this industry for their livelihoods.
Yeah, if you're lucky, there's 4 cents on the dollar.
Yeah.
I wonder what other industries are there where you manufacture and also sell in the same vertically integrated building?
It's wild. It's really hard to think about what they are in the modern day. And that's why I think, we really do need to look at some of these 19th century models that are still in existence and how they're shifting. It became economically indefensible to produce things in cities 100 years ago. And so really all we make in cities now is food. Like in an atomic world, I guess you could say. We make stuff in bits, but you make stuff where land and people are cheap, and you sell it where land and people are expensive. And that just doesn't work for restaurants. And sometimes we'll make the analogy of imagine you had a car dealership and you just got raw steel shipped in the morning. And then you were like, oh, let's make a car today.
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
A bunch of people rolled in at 7:30 and were like, hey, you guys got cars?
Yeah. And by the way, the rest of the steel you had to throw out at the end of the
night. Right.
I'm actually just trying to think as you're saying this, what other industry does that? And I can't think of one, and especially one where everything is so perishable and where the business is so transient, because restaurants are also an experience, but you have to sort of pump these folks through this restaurant. You can't just have them sitting there all day because, the real estate's really expensive. And unless you're actually charging to be there, which you're not, you can't afford to just have them there all day long. So it's like a quick experience as well.
It is. And, like anything in the world, I think our greatest strengths are also our greatest weaknesses. And, I'm on a really strong kind of first principles kick. And I think when I think about restaurants, one of the ways that another one of our challenges is that we increasingly live in a world that's a mixture of atoms and bits, just generally in the 21st century. And restaurants exist almost entirely in the world of atoms. And anything that exists just in atoms in the modern day seems like it kind of struggles.
Yeah. And, I mean, there's, and I think everybody probably knows, but atoms being physical things, bits being digital things.
Yeah, sorry.
There are a lot of restaurants that are 60, 70, 80, 90% digital in terms of their sales, right? Where a lot of whether it's kiosks or online ordering. So I think there is more of that, for sure. And then there's things like Wonder, where there's an aggregation of IP and sort of a simplification of manufacturing, so that you're almost just doing the last mile of manufacturing. So I think that there's definitely some new things popping up, but
I agree. I think
how do you change 99%, 99.99% of the restaurants or food businesses are not that. And you can't just pivot,
and I think Wonder to me is one of the most fascinating companies in the food space right now, because I think that he's he and that team are doing the reframing themselves, and they're just putting it to work. And, you know, I think they also recognize, like, they started, as I understand it, from a place of attention. He started by locking down IP.
Yeah.
And,
Well, I mean, and then he acquired Tastemade specifically to market and advertise all this stuff that
yeah. So this end-to-end sort of distribution to content to media to food production, like the end-to-end verticalization of that, I think is really, really fascinating. Most restaurants aren't that. What's interesting to me is that we figured out how to bring the least profitable elements of restaurants into the digital space.
What's that?
The food. Like what we figured out how to digitize was the commodity, the movement of generally pretty commoditized products from one place to the next. That's what DoorDash does. That's what Uber does. That's what all of those companies are doing. But like, I think if you want to unlock things that are really game changing for restaurants, you want to figure out how to bring more of the experience into the digital world. Like I played around a while ago, and I think I mentioned this to you on our call. I played around a while ago with Matterport, the real estate thing.
Yeah.
And just stood in our restaurant and did the whole restaurant. And then frankly, got in touch with some 18-year-old kid in Indiana, and he built the restaurant on Roblox for me. And I was just curious, what does it look like to bring a restaurant into the digital space?
And then what do you do with that? I mean, there's companies like Tables that are helping you sort of book a table, but what do you do with that? What else do you do with that?
At this point, I've honestly done nothing with it because I can't get it to.
No, I mean, what do you think? What are some things you're thinking that you would do with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are applications. I think I've been exploring for a long time. How do we monetize attention in restaurants? And that might be something that people don't like, and I imagine they probably won't. But we need to find new high margin revenue streams in this industry, one way or another. And attention seems to be the dominant currency for higher margin revenue. And so one thought is, would Diageo pay for digital real estate in a restaurant? I bet they would for major food group. If the grill.
They do often for some of these places, whether it's glasses and things like that.
Yeah. And, there's none of this stuff is new. It's just not 21st century.
Yeah. One of the articles that I read, you were talking about, it was a really, really interesting premise that potentially delivery is undermining the social purpose of restaurants. I'm kind of paraphrasing.
You said it much more clearly than I think I did.
Yeah, but maybe just, talk about that. Well, let's talk about what do you think is the purpose of the restaurant? Because I do feel like they've become a lot more commoditized, and we've kind of decoupled experience from product and also brand, because so many things are now like just delivered to your home. That how much of that is actually the restaurant now, and are they just a manufacturing facility? And at that point, is the economic model different? Anyways, all that to say, maybe could you just talk a little about like why you think delivery might be undermining the social purpose of restaurants and what that purpose is?
Yeah, I mean, I think the social purpose of restaurants, and I just wrote about this, and it's something that's been with me for 15 plus years now. There's a Harvard primatologist, his name is Richard Wrangham, and he has this really interesting sort of cooking hypothesis, which is that literally the ability to control fire and cook food is what turned us into the species we are, Homo sapiens, blah, blah, blah. Because it, at a biological level, it unlocked calories. So we could consume more calories, and the surplus of calories essentially went to growing a prefrontal cortex that made us humans. But he also talks about how it created like this sense of hearth and how that facilitated empathy and, different types of connection. And I believe that's still true hundreds of thousands of years later, that restaurants fulfill that platform for connection and extension of empathy and relationship. And you lose all of that for the most part in the context of delivery. And, I think it's borne out in a lot of different ways. I think I don't think you can decouple sort of the epidemic of loneliness in this country from things like phones and things like food delivery. And I also don't think, maybe a little hyperbolic here, I'm not sure you solve a loneliness epidemic, which is something that the Surgeon General has said we have in this country. I don't know if you solve it without restaurants. They're the social infrastructure for cities, and we're an urban people.
Yeah. But it is siloed social interaction. It's not like going to a gathering of lots of people that you interact with together, like a bar. You're going with the person that you're with. But I do agree that there's, because you can sit at home and have a meal and it's just brought to you instead of going to the restaurant. That's still somewhat social. You could have friends over and do the same thing.
Yeah, I think, and I don't claim to have the answers to this. I just tend to be pretty curious and have spent the last couple of years really exploring it through Substack and through reading and a lot of AI research help. But I hear you. I do think that there's more ways that we socially engage all the senses in a restaurant, whether we're just interacting with the guest around us, like our proximity to larger groups of people, our comfort level in larger groups of people. Even if they're not interacting with them, I think there are a lot of things that happen to us.
No, I think you're right. I think, there's, at home, obviously, there's a lot less impetus for it being special. You could just literally stand up, open the box, and eat, even if it's something nice. Especially with kids. Whereas when you're at a restaurant, it's very intentional. You're sitting down. There's music. There's lighting. There's a server that's going to come talk to you, and you're going to talk back to them, and you're going to ask questions, and you'll probably have a little bit of an interaction with them, and maybe the people, at least at the host end. And there's you're getting dressed into something to go there. There is a lot of intent there to have social interaction. It's a really interesting point. I wonder how much of our loneliness has now been impacted by delivery.
I do think that they are very much connected to one another. And there's a couple super geeky, but you spend a little bit of time with the American Time Use Survey, which I would not recommend anyone does. You see how much time people spend eating and consuming food. And it's, hundreds of billions of hours a year. And I think by 2030, they think that 60% of that will be food away from home.
That's crazy.
And so when I think about my own dinners, if I'm at home with my wife and a 3.5-year-old, dinner is 15, 20 minutes of actually focused sitting and eating. Mm-hmm. And if you're 3.5, it's not even that. So versus 90 minutes. And they're just radically different. One is a biological need. Another is a social 3-dimensional thing sometimes.
Yeah, I wonder if that's a new thing too, though. I remember even just growing up, dinner was we sat down and it wasn't very delicious, but you'd sit down and you'd have you'd be there for 45 minutes and talk about your days. And I don't remember if that how it was when I was 3. I know my 2 kids, we can't keep them at the table for more than 10 minutes, but my wife and I will try to stay longer.
Yeah, and it might be. Certainly a lot of life has sped up.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised if proportionately it's that sped up as much as everything else.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was going to ask you about, you wrote an article, and I think it was about, in reference to that gentleman, Mr. Wrangham, about potentially cooking being what made us human. And it made me think right away of Yuval Noah Harari.
Yeah.
His contention being that cooperation in large groups is what made us human, and the ability to actually assemble into larger groups. I'm wondering, what do you think about those two? About is he right? Is cooking right? Is it both?
I'm not sure that one didn't I'm not sure that Wrangham's thinking didn't predate Harari's a little bit. Could you have gotten to cooperation without increased caloric intake and sort of the function of cooking in the context of...
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. It's like a leading indicator.
Yeah. I think a lot of this, anything in the world, a lot of it boils down to biology and chemistry and physics. And if you didn't change the biology, the chemistry, and the physics, I'm not sure you would have gotten to where Harari thinks we are. And I agree with both of them, and I don't think they're mutually exclusive in any way.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, because in order to cooperate in large groups, there had to be enough food
Right.
and safety that you could do that, and that's I'm sure cooking was a big
Yeah.
part of that.
Man, Josh, you can cut this part out, but like you're going deep cuts on this conversation.
Oh,
Like,
I mean, this is, like we don't have to cut this out. I
no, I love it.
when I started reading all the all your Substacks, which I I should have read a couple weeks ago. I was like, oh man, this is fucking cool. Let's dig into this.
Yeah, and the whole purpose, like I think we need to be thinking more and differently about restaurants. That's the whole thing about the newsletter is like we need to be bringing cool minds, curious minds together to think about restaurants in a little bit of a different way. And I'm trying to spark that a little.
Yeah. So I mean, you talked about subsidizing the non-profitable part of a business, right? In New York Times case, it's news. In restaurants case, it's food.
Sure.
What have you thought about some ways in which you could subsidize that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how far out here we want to get, but like I certainly think that like restaurant as ad platform, restaurant as attention marketplace is one that I think a lot about. I think we are a matter of a couple years away. Some of this again gets a little creepy and kind of Palantir-esque, but I think that we're going to be I think restaurants should be making money off of helping train large behavior models in the next 5 years.
How so?
Computer vision. I mean, there's a lot of privacy issues, and don't get me wrong, I'm not necessarily in favor of this, although I am generally in favor of being creative about how restaurants might make money. But, the large language models have already consumed most, I believe, of the digital content that's out there. And in order for them to continue to evolve and grow in the way that they have over the past 3 years, that's blown us all away, they now need to start to understand the physical world.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a place for restaurants to make money in that. I think not to talk your book at all and why you're not an ingredient marketplace for me to sell my data to Procter and Gamble and Kraft Heinz as 60% of the food dollar moves to restaurants. They need to know where we're at, and you have all my ingredients.
Yeah, believe me, it comes up often.
Right.
Most for us, it's mostly about figuring out every way that we can protect IP while still helping restaurants make money from their IP, which is what we're thinking about. But
Great. Glad to hear it.
I do think there's a huge opportunity I mean, we have like 1 million recipes in Mies right now, and the actual recipes from restaurants all over the world. And there's so much valuable data there to help understand more things that I would love for the restaurant to make money, to be able to like monetize that. But it's interesting you bring up, there's language models was sort of like this first phase, and now there's all this sort of like spatial models so that you can understand the world around you. But there's also, I mean, I don't even know how they get to this, but if you think about truly learning the value of taste and quality is going to take also understanding olfactory senses and reaction to certain things. And I mean, you can sort of dial in the science of why a food is this much salty, this much sweet, and the Brix level is this, but at some point, humans obviously like will react to that a certain way, and like I think it's super interesting to figure out how do you start to learn that, like how do humans interact with certain levels of sweetness balanced with this saltiness, balanced with this acid, because that's what we do as chefs, right? We try to, we're creative, but we also have to sort of balance food and create something that's satiating. I have to imagine that it's probably a long way away. Recipes are terrible in AI right now, but I think there's definitely a future where that also can be understood. Why do most people like this thing? There's a fattiness to it, but there's also enough of this acid and there's some sweetness. And what's similar about that,
Oh, and I think that those things are out there now, and it's going to be like, if you think about the food scientists behind Mondelez and Nestle.
Yeah.
Like if it's not already happening, I would be very surprised that if someone isn't baking into a sort of specific LLM model or pointing an LLM model towards understanding that. I forget what some of the names of the companies are. There's one here in Massachusetts called Chew that does a lot of work with like Mars and stuff like that. But
why is the future of restaurants franchises?
So I'm definitely prone to hyperbolic headlines. I will say that. So I don't.
Okay, yeah. I don't think that you believe that 100% of restaurants will be franchises, but you wrote an article for context that the future is franchises.
So the thought there is like, if you think about what a franchise is, it's an operating system. And, it's an instantiation of expertise at some level is what a franchise is all about. And when you marry that up with knowledge bases and RAG, retrieval, augmented generation, like, so basically just, I have a file full of stuff that has a bunch of knowledge in it, point an LLM at it, and then you can just kind of start to ask it questions.
Yep.
Like the idea that you could have the combination of knowledge bases and agentic tools in the context of a franchise. So like, getting a little out there and I've been told I'm 5 to 10 years ahead in my head of where the technology actually is, but something going into ChatGPT operator, going into Toast on its own and pulling a bunch of reports and telling me how I should schedule next week. And it gets me 80 to 90% of the way there. But then the human element of it doesn't know how Claire's feeling.
Yeah.
It doesn't know that Joe gets tired if you put him on more than 2 doubles.
What's interesting is I remember, oh my gosh, this had to have been 10 years ago when I first started using 7 shifts at one of my restaurants. And Jordan Bosch, the founder of 7 shifts. He was thinking about how to train this model to like understand how to predict how to schedule your restaurant. And I thought it was so interesting. I mean, this was 10 years ago, and I asked him like, what, like, are you using regression models? Like, what are you doing to, He's like, yeah, we have, we obviously like are looking at forecasts and things like that. And Jordan, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I remember him saying that the sentiment from the employees was one of the main drivers of how to think about scheduling. Meaning, like after each shift, asking each team member, did you feel overwhelmed? Did you feel like it was too busy, not busy enough? And they would use that information to inform, like, are you scheduling, enough people? Is it too many people? Is it not enough? I always thought that was so interesting. I don't know what I have to ask him how they've sort of doubled down on that. But
yeah, it's interesting that most of the scheduling tools do have sort of like a sentiment thing for the staff on the back end. And I also think it's telling that every one of the tools gives you the option to turn it off if you're the operator.
Yeah.
Which I think is interesting.
So if more and more restaurants are gravitating towards franchising, right, licensing their IP and scaling, because they're able to standardize and operationalize like this idea that they have, what does that look like? What are restaurants that are today not that you think will be that, in 10 years?
Yeah, I think this is my great fear is like, I don't think the dystopian future of the restaurant industry is the death of restaurants. I think it's the homogenization of them. And that those who have fast casual Kavas, Sweet Greens of the world will continue to have and aggregate more. And I think that's one potential future to the franchise. Like where this technology might take us is sort of accelerating kind of power laws, and those who have get more and those who don't have get nothing, and the hollowing out of the middle. But I also think that there's a world where, I have a 3-location restaurant. We have 3 Shybirds, all within 3 miles of each other. I also have friends who run restaurants in Philadelphia, and I was down there last month for the chef conference and got to talking with Greg Vernick briefly of Vernick Food. And why, if he has a landlord who's interested in an all-day activation, why should he start from scratch?
Yeah.
Like, there's also ways, and it's interesting. I love that you brought up cooperation earlier, because I think like one of the paths forward for us as an industry, I think, has a lot to do with like, how do we cooperate where it makes sense? Like, obviously, yes, in some ways we're competing with each other, but in a lot of ways we're not. And we're actually competing against DoorDash, and we're competing against Netflix, and we're competing against any disposable way someone might spend their money. And
that's right.
So I can see a world where like it's more micro franchises. And, I think in the article I talked about, then you start to think about new forms of ownership and blockchain, and like, what is the idea of maybe, a young person who loves restaurants having a micro ownership in a franchise.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways we can start to think about this stuff a little differently. And
I mean, I think one of the opportunities that will just become more ubiquitous that happens today, but it actually only happens. I could be wrong here, but I think at the highest level, both in terms of very highly scaled fast casual QSR restaurants, and then the great, full service brands, in that they so deeply understand their customer, and a lot of this is technology, but some of it's analog. So if you think about major food group, and you think about Carbone, very good food. Is it the greatest red sauce in the world? I think they would agree. It's probably like, it's really good, but they create an exceptional experience because they know every single thing about you. The first time you come in there, they start to index that, and every single time, that's a much more a part of their special sauce, is that they are so good at crafting an experience for you, and they're maniacal about it. And that will become easier for more people to do. And really, that's to your point of like, this is a social experience as much as it's food. Is like, that's important. Is obviously you don't want to be invasive, but I want to know that when you came in, you loved this thing, and you thought that this drink was really interesting, and you hated this table that you were at, and you were with your girlfriend and you proposed or something, and now you're married. All those things are like ways we can just make a better experience for you. And it used to be very hard to do that. You just make notes and on a piece of paper, and it's become easier now. And I think the more that becomes easier and easier, the more power these restaurants will be able to have to, whether you have 6 customers in your restaurant or 100, you got to give them an incredible experience. And the more that you do, the more you'll get. But it's not easy to do today.
It's not easy to do. And I do question whether it actually has gotten easier, frankly, because I think there's 2 sides to every coin. Like when we created Open Table guest notes to have sort of a sustained, persistent understanding of guests, I would argue we also atrophied the maitre d'.
Yeah.
And like, that's sort of like a second order effect of these technologies, is that they tend to create disengagement in the actual human level. Because now you walk into a restaurant, we've all felt it. Like you walk into a restaurant and a host might look down at Open Table or Resi for a table recommendation and no longer be making eye contact, no longer be thinking about me as the guest and where I might be most comfortable, and just looking down at an algorithm saying 44. And there's a lot of history in this. Like there's a wonderful book by a guy named Nicholas Carr called The Glass Cage, where he talks a lot about sort of the flip side of technologies that, when planes basically started flying themselves, you then had to create all of these reasons for the pilot to stay engaged. And like, he talks about that. And I think there's an analog for that. I think I wrote something about this years ago before I even had the Substack. Like when Open Table went from, dating myself here, slot-based to an algorithmic system, we kind of destroyed 125 years of what it meant to be a maitre d' and traded it for basically a CRM.
Mm-hmm.
And so all that is to say, like, I think some things have gotten easier, but other things actually are harder as a result of the technology at the high end.
Yeah, I feel like, but that seems like an easier solve then the flip side of how do you make sure that you stay engaged with your customer if things get, if the ability to index more and more of what makes them when they come back, that part, the engagement. I think the more that we take things off their plate, the more they can spend. At the end of the day, especially, I mean, kiosks are becoming more and more ubiquitous, but it doesn't remove the person in front. It might just mean that there's much less of them, but then their job becomes engagement.
Yeah, but I do think that there's a trade-off there. Is like when you're doing less of it and it's starting with a computer interaction, do you stay as sharp at it? It is a muscle, like hospitality, empathy, connection is a muscle. And if you don't exercise it, it will atrophy. And I do feel like you see a little bit of that in the industry these days.
Do you remember? I don't remember all the context behind it. Do you remember, didn't Danny Meyer roll out some things with Apple Watches to help servers understand a little bit more about what was going on? And
I remember that being like an early thing in conversation with Resi. Like in the early days of Resi, they were going to do like alerts and notifications from the host stand to Apple Watches. I do think we're very much headed down that path. Like,
only Meta glasses, things like that probably are a better, tool. I mean, you can literally be looking at someone and get information, but that's a whole other skill you have to learn then too.
Well, you do and you don't. I mean, you put on a pair of Meta glasses and you marry that up with the idea of, I think they've gotten LLM models to be able to understand like 95%, or maybe, I don't know if they're LLMs or something else, but like to get a proper read of emotion on someone's face.
Yeah. What's funny is I'm actually terrible at that. There's so many times when like I have trouble reading the room. I mean, my wife will tell you this firsthand, and I would take Meta glasses just for that. It's funny idea. A couple of weeks ago, I almost got a pair, and I was like, you know what? They're just not there yet. There's not enough that I would do because I'd want to like remind it, like capture notes and things like that. And it's not there yet, but
yeah. And I actually did just buy a pair and what tipped me over into it, and this was 2 days ago. So I haven't done anything with them yet. The translation, as someone who's working in restaurants, 50 to 60 hours a week, the idea that...
How does that work in the glasses?
I don't really know yet because I haven't even tried it, but essentially I think there's 23 languages you can choose. You have to download them to the glasses, but then when someone speaks to you in Spanish, in ear, it's coming to you in English.
That's nuts. Oh, okay, I might need to get them just for that. I didn't realize that it did that.
Yeah, and I do think like the unlocks of some of the technologies for restaurants, where we haven't gotten them yet, but they're coming soon. I think a big one will be around translation and actually meaningful connection between the diverse communities that actually make restaurants happen, where the communication mechanisms can be really challenging. And how do we actually start to bridge some of that? I think could get really, really fun, really fast.
Yeah.
I mean, with your product, like we have 2 tablets set to Spanish, 1 tablet sent to Portuguese, and 1 tablet set to English.
Yeah.
And like I'm sure a lot of operators use your...
Yeah, a lot. It's a lot of Spanish. It's funny. It's there's like this influx in Japan that they just, they found us via, our self-serve sign up because we were seeing all this Japanese people reading, me's in Japanese.
Interesting.
But yeah, I mean, look, I think recipes are a great example of that. They are pretty translatable. There's some challenges there, but I think there was one article you had about the $1 trillion tech company or the $1 trillion tech company draft or something like that. I think I remember like you putting like Louis Vuitton as one of the, you had sort of forecasted what you thought would be the $1 trillion company in food tech, whether it's Square or Toast or DoorDash or Blackbird or Louis Vuitton.
Yeah, I did it. I do believe that someone will build $1 trillion business on top of the food service industry. When
you say $1 trillion, do you mean $1 trillion valuation or $1 trillion in revenue?
Valuation.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like $100 billion revenue.
Yes. Yeah. So I was saying market cap of
Gotcha.
$1
Okay.
trillion. That's largely built on the back of restaurants and food service. And yeah, I put Louis Vuitton on there because I think, when you see the migration from goods to experiences, affluence is pointing itself more towards experiences than goods. And that's been going on for a while. And you can actually see it in Louis Vuitton's behavior in that they started buying up hotels. They just bought L'Ami Louis in Paris. They're buying up and consolidating, just like they consolidated luxury goods in the form of fashion and purses. I see them on somewhat of a path to trying to do the same thing in the luxury goods segment, or luxury goods, luxury restaurants. But then they also, when you think about what they did with makeup, there's Dior, but then there's Sephora, and they're both LVMH companies. And so if I'm even incrementally right about this, that's why I put them on the list.
It's interesting. I never thought about that, but it makes a lot of sense. It's tough to get. I mean, there's only $1 trillion in revenue, and I mean that's only in the U.S. There's $1 trillion in restaurant revenue in the U.S. So I don't know how much there is worldwide, but yet you kind of have to be either owning the sales or having an insane amount of market penetration and owning a part of the transaction of the sale.
Well, and I also think that but like, I think I can't remember. I think my number one draft pick might have been DoorDash. But like, if you kind of game theory this out, and I find it terrifying because I really don't like DoorDash as a company at all.
Why not?
I just think they're parasitic.
Tell me more.
Brilliant, but parasitic. I think it was his second quarter earnings call in 2024. The founder, clearly a genius. Someone asked him a question of like, why restaurants? And he said, his answer was something, and I'm going to almost get it verbatim, but I might be off a little. We knew that if we penetrated the network with the most nodes in the physical world, we could go anywhere from there. And we determined that restaurants have the most nodes in the physical world.
Yeah, I mean,
brilliant, right? Borderline psychopathic, in my opinion. And then there was also the path by which they just went and scraped menus and didn't really care about whether the restaurant wanted to do takeout or not. I think that was some of the early days of them. Sorry, I geek out on this stuff, but like, I happened to go look at what Chef's Warehouse, the market cap for Chef's Warehouse.
It's around $3.5 billion right now, right?
Give or take. Yeah. Imagine DoorDash buys Chef's Warehouse. They have the distribution. They have logistics and distribution. They're kind of flanking the entire industry at that point. You're reading rumors about DoorDash buying 7 rooms.
Yeah. I mean, Chef's Warehouse is a pretty small player in the
I'm just saying
distribution space. But yeah, like if they bought Cisco or something, that would be a
well, and I mean, sure, sub it in. But if you start to think about how all a company like DoorDash might need to do is penetrate the supply chain in a meaningful way. And they could be off to the races on that.
Yeah. I mean, what's DoorDash's market cap right now?
I want to say 70 billion.
Yeah, because I think Cisco's around 40 or something like that.
Yeah. So my understanding, at my core, I'm a restaurant manager, so I don't quite know. I have no idea what. My understanding, though, is that that's not possible. A $70 billion company can't acquire a $40 billion company, but I could be wrong about that.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
But at any rate, it's really just about like, and I do believe that this is where DoorDash is trying to get to, is to really just sort of flank the entire industry.
They do a lot more than restaurants now, though. The other day, I ordered salt pellets for my water filtration system on DoorDash from Home Depot.
And that's where the brilliance of that
was it DoorDash? No, wait a second. That was Instacart.
But DoorDash, you probably could have on DoorDash. And that's where the brilliance of the insight is around recognizing restaurants' ubiquity. Like, we are another way when we talk about how restaurants might make money in different ways. We are the last quarter mile distribution system.
Yeah. That's, it's interesting. I was just thinking about that when we were talking about, okay, how do we subsidize? How do we sort of add incremental revenue? the amount of deliveries that these restaurants are doing, what else could they be sending when they're sending this food?
I have this drives me crazy, in some ways. And I think, Ben Leventhal's piece recently about what did restaurants learn from the pandemic? I really wish we had learned more about that. We never closed. We opened our first restaurant, Shy Bird, in August of 2019. So we never closed a day for the pandemic. But we were delivering, physically, my business partner and myself, at one point we had 6 cars on the road, and we're delivering microwave popcorn, tampons. You could add anything to your cart.
Yeah.
We could put anything on toast, and then they could add anything to their cart. But I don't think that was ever going to sustain post-pandemic. But it does fascinate me that DoorDash knows what their top 50 SKUs are.
Yeah.
Why isn't there just some sort of locker in my restaurant that has the top 50 SKUs, and someone adds it to their cart, and we save a driver a trip, and then I get either lower DoorDash revenue share rates or...
Yeah.
This seems very doable to me.
That's interesting. Yeah, especially if they're, and that top 50 might be very different depending on geographically where you are. So they could probably get pretty granular about that too.
Yeah. And I think it's, Lord knows, packing food is a challenge. And that's one that if anybody has any good solutions for ensuring that we don't forget a sauce, I am all ears. So, then also forgetting, I don't know, someone's paper towels. You got to think through how it actually works on the ground. But we're on every corner. We're on multiple parts of every block. And we all have underutilized time or space. And how do we just think a little differently about that?
Yeah. And I think, it would be easy to say, well, wait a second, I got in this to build. There's obviously this art and commerce problem we have, right? But if you think about delivery as a completely different medium than your restaurant, and the restaurant is where you come to have an experience, and then delivery is where you can have incremental revenue. You can have a piece of that experience. I think that's the thing that a lot of people forget is it's not your restaurant. And let's be honest, the idea of we're going to create an incredible digital experience. One, you can't control that if you're using DoorDash, and that's the majority of where your delivery is probably coming from DoorDash or one of those, and it's just not the same, right?
Sure.
So, yeah, why not? Why not capitalize on that and just get it, increase the check average with other things that could be helpful?
Yeah, and
it is a little bit strange if someone brought me a medium rare steak and some toilet paper.
Yeah, and I do think I think a lot of what's interesting about this is, and it's another reframing thing, is what we're really good at in restaurants, if we're operating them well, is we're experienced designers. At the end of the day, if you strip a lot of things back, what a restaurant is a successful restaurant. All it's doing really well is creating an experience that you want to have again. It's that simple and it's that hard. But it's also that applicable to so many different things. If I wanted to talk to someone about, hey, how do I make the delivery of a steak and toilet paper feel good to the recipient? I might talk to a great hospitality mind, because they're the people who actually know how to sort of navigate the awkwardness and bring the emotional intelligence to it to connect the dots there. When you reframe restaurant work and hospitality as compelling experience design, and then you start to look at the people who are really good at it, I think you end up unlocking some really cool, underutilized skill sets.
The problem is you can't control the experience because you're not the one delivering that food, and it's too expensive for an individual restaurant to deliver all their own food. The unit economics just aren't there. Now, that said, if the check average went from, $40 per person to, $180 per person or something, then you probably could, because you can only do 4 deliveries in an hour, typically in a city, whether you're on a bike or a car or something. So you can't control that experience unless you actually do it yourself. And I don't know how many restaurants. There's not many restaurants that deliver it themselves.
Yeah, but I also think that there's a market opportunity there as well, in the same way that, Wheelie, I think, is in London and is the really high-end Uber. Uber used to be the really high-end Uber. Does Wonder end up with a higher, because of the IP and their focus on food? Because I think they bought Relay in New York, if I'm not mistaken, and they bought Grubhub.
They bought Relay? I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
By the way, whatever happened to GoPuff?
I mean, there was never...
Are they still around? I don't even know what they did.
I think they are, but like the 15-minute delivery thing was like a total ZERP.
I've never used GoPuff. I don't know. I don't think it just wasn't in my area. Like, what was that what it is? It was like grocery in 15 minutes?
Yeah, it's 15. There was GoPuff and Getter and Joker and all these things. And, all of them, in my opinion, were kind of like ZERP fever dreams, like the zero interest rate phenomenon.
Is Reef still around?
Barely, I think.
I think they raised like 700 million or something.
Oh, yeah, at least. And it, at its core, like an interesting idea. Like Reef started out as, we think autonomous vehicles are going to be a big thing, and we're going to end up with a bunch of discarded parking lots. That was sort of the original premise of Reef.
Yeah, yeah.
And how do we activate them? And the first place they went to think about how to activate, and I think this is telling about our industry, the first place they went was food.
Yeah.
And that speaks to, I think, our collective power as an industry. Any one of us individually has none. But in aggregate, man, a lot of companies realize how powerful this industry is. We just got to figure out as an industry how to partake of some of that power.
Yeah, and how to organize in a in a meaningful way, because that's also difficult.
Agreed. I think there are some things. I'm a big believer that if and when sort of blockchain finds its way out of the trough of disillusionment, its path out will be restaurants, in my opinion.
I'm struggling to see that, but I
don't know. Ask Ben Leventhal. I think he's the one making that bet. He's making a big bet around that.
Yeah, well, I think his approach to creating a network, I didn't realize that was necessarily blockchain, more so just like creating a network of.
Well, it's all built on blockchain. The whole thing is built on blockchain, and if you kind of read between the lines, and he started talking a little bit more openly about it, and it's absolutely audacious. I put them on my $1 trillion list too, and that was a stretch, but by a long shot. But he's trying to create an entirely new economy, an economic framework for restaurants to operate on.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. Actually, he was on the show a couple weeks ago, and I think it's brilliant what he's doing. And it's also, what I love about it is it's so accretive to like every part of the industry, the employees and the customers and the restaurants.
I mean,
and that's a hard thing to do.
It really is, and it's fascinating. Like, I mean, when I saw that they were doing the employee puck thing, that was brilliant on so many levels. I also think there's like a hidden thing there with Blackbird that I love that I feel like they don't talk a lot about, is how fundamentally different it is when you bring loyalty to the front of the experience as opposed to the back. Because like, if you think about the way loyalty typically works, it's linked to payment, right? Because that's the thing. But that's at the end of the experience. So it doesn't allow me to actually do much as the operator. But if you actually bring loyalty to the beginning of the experience, and then I get the next 90 minutes to capitalize on that awareness, that's cool.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's super smart. Well, this was a wide-ranging conversation.
For better or worse. It's really refreshing and nice to actually be able to. I don't find that there's a lot of opportunities for conversations like this, but I think there needs to be. I'd like to think that we would benefit from more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wide-ranging.
I mean, I think we have to, and I love these kinds of conversations, and I love that you want to talk about this, and you have restaurants, and there's a lot we could talk about with your restaurants, but this is impacting everybody, so. I love that we did, and I'm super stoked that I got to know you, and thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, Yeah, thanks. I sort of obviously we're a customer of you guys, but I've also just been following what you've been doing on, the media side of what you're doing, the content side. I was compelled to reach out to you because I saw in sort of how you were approaching Mies a lot of reframing going on in it as well. And I felt like there might be sort of an opportunity to chat and maybe learn some things from one another. And I know I have, and along the way, and I hope we continue to.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm grateful and glad that you did reach out. I'm sure we'll keep talking about this, but I think we're just scratching the surface of how things are going to change. What I love most is that we don't know what we don't know, and I think we both probably agree that AI is and just technology innovation in general is at first feels like a disruptor that will kill a bunch of jobs and kill a bunch of experience. But like with anything, what ends up happening is it just creates entirely new opportunities and new jobs and new experiences that just never could have happened before. And these kinds of conversations, I think, are super interesting because we start to think about what could be, because if you don't, they'll never get built.
Yeah, I mean, my piece that I put out today, it was just called "Tell Me What You Want," and like obviously like a silly Spice Girls reference, but the piece is entirely about like I've learned over the past year and a half putting basically everything we do in our restaurants through an AI to understand how it might contribute. That if you start to ask these things in the right way for exactly what you want, you get pretty damn close to what it is. And so the article today was actually a call out to anyone who reads the piece. Hey, it connects to a type form and it just says, add a line. As a guest, I would love to be able to look at a menu and know without fail whether there's nightshade in it.
Yeah.
And like, there's a lot of different ways, I'm a chef and my kitchen's going down every single night. Any idea what dish might be causing everything to back up?
Yeah. I went on a bit of a rant about this a couple shows ago, and I've been talking about it a lot lately. It's the menu data has been pretty analog for a very long time. And so we weren't able to query it and understand and learn and use that information to help the customers, to help staff. And I really think there's this huge opportunity to know anything you want to know and reduce the amount of training or reduce the amount of mistakes and let staff be able to focus on being personable. And I mean, this happens to me all the time. Not all the time because I don't get to go out there and eat that often anymore. Where I'll go to a restaurant and maybe it's a nice restaurant and I see a cocktail menu and it just has like 3 ingredients. So like coconut, rum, and lime. I'm like, I know it's probably got some foam. It's probably like whitewashed or something, all kinds. And, I have no idea what that is. I don't know what else is in it. And I might have some allergies. And one, it takes a long time for the server to even get there to answer it. They might not know the whole thing either. And like maybe there's like falernum in it. They don't know what that is. They give you kind of a, whatever answer they can. And I might want to know like, what should I drink with this hamachi I'm about to have? And tell me about, this wine. All of that can be answered very quickly and more effectively, with the use of AI. I don't know how you create that experience where you're not just talking to a robot. If you could do that and the experience was exceptional, think about how much less time you'd have to spend on that part of the service with your team, and you could just actually focus on how are you, how are you feeling.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like because I think there will be second order effects in there too, where I think what got a lot of us into this industry and excited about it over time early on was passion for product. Like when you talk to a 20-something about what they love about restaurants, usually it's a combination of camaraderie, passion for great food. I love bartending. I want to geek out on natural wine.
Yeah.
And so what happens, when some of that stuff becomes a little more technologically driven, I think is an open question. But yeah, I agree. I mean, I certainly think one of the first things I started playing around with when I saw what these LLMs could do, someone should take this. Actually, me should take this. AllerGPT.
What do you mean by PT?
AllerGPT. It's a silly name, but
Oh, gotcha, like a GPT.
Yeah, just you put a QR code on a menu or whatever. I know people don't love QR codes, but like if you want to have edge case allergens that a server, you think you could just scan the menu and it goes and looks at me's and
yeah, and that's what I mean. Is like all that information should be like at your fingertips with zero mistakes, because it's, if you have all that menu data, there's no reason why you can't enter all of it granularly.
Cool stuff. No doubt about it.
Well, Eli, thank you. This was great, and I'm sure we'll keep chatting about this. But and I'm excited to see what you keep building with Reggie, and of course with Shybird. So thanks for coming in.
Yeah, appreciate the conversation. Thanks, Josh.